Help support Friendo Club by going to patreon.com/Stephen Larson or clicking join at youtube.com/Stephen Larson. Access to bonus episodes, question threads for the Going In Raw podcast, and entry to our monthly wrestling predictions challenges. Join the Friendo Club today. Hey, Friendo, Steve here.
Hey, Larson.
Welcome back to Going In Raw Count Out on this episode in honor of one of my favorite factions in the history of pro wrestling, Judgment Day.
Steve, if you could you sing a bar or two of Judgment Day's theme, The Other Side?
Oh, I thought you were going to ask me to do it in a certain voice, but no, absolutely. If you believe yours is the only way.
All right, that's sufficient. No, I asked you to do that. That was foolishness on my part.
Why would you do that to the people out there?
I mean, the song's catchy. You know, like poor Edge, he starts this faction. He has his favorite band or one of his favorite bands do a theme, and then he gets kicked out of the faction and leaves the company.
Not just any theme. I'm sorry, but out of all the edge-based themes, maybe even out of all the Alter Bridge themes, this is number one to me. I love The Other Side. I think it's a terrific song. I've played it multiple times on the way to playing basketball with you.
Oh, it's one of your hype songs, huh?
Every single time I've played it, I've swept. Every single time.
Really? Why don't you play it every time then?
I like to make things interesting. I can't sweep every time, Larson. As Lacey says,
you could.
Listen, Lacey told me, she gave me the rule. You don't have to win all of them. You got to let him win sometimes, Larson.
So condescending and patronizing.
Talk to her about that. That's her words, not mine.
I don't know. I don't know if how much is her versus you.
She is the one who started doing this stuff.
That's true.
Your everlasting feud with my wife. Anyways, we're not talking about the Steve Larson and Lacey faction. We're talking about wrestling factions.
Yes.
And the ones that gave us the most righteous, true, dramatic ways of splitting up. This is going to be a fun list. We've got another one coming up next week with the worst endings to various factions.
Which will be an interesting list, to say the least. But this one, there's a lot of good stuff on here. Some of the most famous, noteworthy, shocking, memorable faction splits in the history of wrestling are included here. And hey, if there's some that you think, hey, Stephen Larson, you forgot about these, let us know in the comments. We want engagement on these videos we put out. That means likes. That means comments. So if we miss something, let us know in the comments. If you like the list, let us know in the comments. If you have ideas for other top 10s we could do, guess what? Leave it in the comments.
I'll even go you one better. I'll make this deal. Next week on Count Out, we'll look back at the comments from this episode and we'll read some of our favorite ones. So let us know what you guys think about top factions disbanding, favorite story beats, et cetera, et cetera. Everything Larson just said. Go ahead and drop that in the comments. Let's go ahead and kick this thing off, though, with number 10.
10.
The Four Horsemen. Now,
Which one? Which one?
I know what you're thinking.
Which one, Steve?
They disbanded a lot of times.
They did.
Oh, man. One of my favorite things about this, Larson, is doing the research. We dug up a bunch of shout out to Pro Wrestling Bios, of course, an absolutely epic wrestling channel that has logged the stories of a great many acts in pro wrestling. And talk about a tall task, giving the history as well as he could in a half-hour-long video of the Four Horsemen.
Oh, sometimes some of the videos are shorter than that. They encapsulate the story of, whether it be a storyline or faction in 20 minutes. But yes, a faction that's as long-running has been involved in as many pretty memorable wrestling moments as the Four Horsemen. They encapsulate their entire run, their entire careers, and anything less than like 45 minutes seems a feat.
I thought one of the more interesting aspects, things that I had not heard before watching the Pro Wrestling Bios video on the Four Horsemen, was the fact that depending on what territory they were in, Arn and Ole Anderson had different familial relations. So in one territory, they were uncle and nephew. In another, they were brothers. And I thought that was pretty wild.
That's interesting.
And in fact, they weren't related at all.
Not at all. No.
But they'd go from territory to territory, and for whatever reason, they would have a different family relation. Thought that was pretty funny. But the point of watching the Pro Wrestling Bios episode on the Four Horsemen was, of course, learning about the disbandment. Now, probably we'll talk about the Four Horsemen appear in next week's list as well.
Yes, as mentioned at the head, they broke up several times.
Right, exactly. However, and we can even debate maybe which of their various disbandments is peak, but in my opinion, and we'll see where you stand on this, in my opinion, Kurt Hennig turning on them in 97 is probably, given their long history, how he seemed to fit in perfectly with the Horsemen and ended up siding with the NWO instead. I thought that was probably the best way to go about disbanding.
Yeah. You mentioned Kurt and Ric Flair's history going back to both their times in WWF, WWE in the early 90s. You know, Kurt dealt with a good many injuries during his run, not just in WWE, but thereafter. And he returned to the wrestling ring coming to WCW in 1997. It was pretty exciting.
Yeah.
Mr. Perfect was one of those names you think about, well, the best wrestlers who never won the WWE Championship.
Absolutely.
You got to put Mr. Perfect on that list. And so he shows up at WCW, aligns with the Horsemen. And as you mentioned, Arn was like, I vouch for this dude. He's taking my spot. Mm-hmm. He's just not joining the Horsemen. He's taking my spot.
Mm-hmm.
And that carried a lot of weight. Even though in 1997, I remember watching when Kurt joined the Horsemen. On when it happened, and I'd only been watching WCW for maybe, I don't know, 6 months, a year. Mm-hmm. I was like, oh, Arn's getting up a spot. Ooh, that seems like a deal.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Arn, dude, even going back to that pay-per-view a week ago in WWE, he comes off as so earnest, and everything he says has such weight to it.
Gravitas, Steve.
That's right.
Gravitas. So, Kurt gets Arn's spot in the Horsemen. Fast forward to World War III.
Did you imagine if Kurt shows up and Arn's like, listen, you're not going to have my spot, but you can have Paul Roma's spot.
Kurt turns that day. He doesn't wait. Like, Paul Roma, get out of here. More on Paul Roma next week. Yeah. So fast forward to War Games, where you got Horsemen, you got NWO in the ring. And Kurt turns on Ric Flair, smashes his head in the door of the double cage, and this isn't some deal where it's just, you can just tell the chain link fence is hitting the bottom of his head. Yeah. This is frame of door onto Flair's head. It looks gnarly. Gnarly. Yeah. And Kurt joins up with the new World Order,
along with Rick Rude.
Yeah, and the Horsemen are in shambles.
Yeah. Now, eventually, thanks to some contract negotiations gone wrong, or at the very least, Ric Flair wanted to go see his kids' wrestling match when he wasn't scheduled for an episode of Thunder, and Eric Bischoff decided at the last second to use him, and Flair didn't comply. He came back, and because Flair's return was such a big deal, they took advantage of that. And made a big deal about the Horsemen getting back together, this time with Malenko and Benoit, and of course Steve Mongo McMichael. But and when that eventually fell apart, it was basically because everything was falling apart.
Yeah.
But in '97, they had an opportunity there to really show, the Horsemen, they're done with. I mean, the NWO at the time, they were so damn cool, anyways.
Well, then Bischoff had no qualms about throwing the Horsemen in front of the NWO for the NWO to utterly annihilate them. They
were chum. Chum.
Yeah.
The NWO.
It seemed like Bischoff relished every opportunity to embarrass the Horsemen.
Yeah, the Horsemen never got theirs over the NWO. They would go into deep Horseman territory, and the NWO would still get the better of them. Bischoff seemed to have no love for the Horsemen.
No.
But it's a shame too, because that really could have been a hell of a feud. A proper feud, but didn't happen. So yeah, there you go. 1997's Horsemen. Stay tuned next week when we'll give you 1993's disbandment of the Horsemen.
Yeah, what a weird iteration of the Horsemen that was. For a lot of reasons.
Yeah, we'll get to that. Then next up, number 9. Jurassic Express and Christian.
You know, if nothing else, I mean, like Jurassic Express, Christian, they were a fun team while they were around.
Yeah, they were.
But to think where everybody is now, especially Christian and especially Jack Perry, how their characters have evolved from, you know, pretty straightforward babyface team to you got scapegoat heel Jack Perry driving around the country in a scapegoat mobile. You got Christian leading the patriarchy, doing amazing Hall of Fame worthy heel work. And it's interesting to see where it all originated back here when they had Christian join up with Luchasaurus and Jungle Boy to serve as their mentor and guide them on their pursuit to win the tag team titles. And they wrestled some trios matches together as well. And it finally culminated when Jurassic Express beat the Lucha Brothers in early January 2022 episode of Dynamite. They had those belts for about 5 months before losing them to the Young Bucks. Christian turned on Jack Perry that very night. He just couldn't wait. He couldn't wait for them to lose the tag title so he could turn on Jack Perry.
Champing at the bit. And you're absolutely right. When you look at throughout the last 3 years of AEW, it's suffered a lot of 2 years. It suffered a lot of criticism for its creative, but one of the absolute bright spots has been the work of Christian Cage. I think that's one thing that universally people are like, yeah, no, this is actually, you know, incredibly entertaining stuff. You look at how far Jack Perry's career has advanced since then. You know, obviously, backstage footage of him getting choked by CM Punk helped a little bit of that in that realm. But given where his career is now, and yeah, like you said, the patriarchy where they are now, it's turned out like that was a pretty big moment for AEW for this particular faction, and it was a very effective moment as well.
It was, absolutely, and to think from this moment onward, for Christian especially, it was a pretty clear line for Christian after the breakup of Jurassic Express for him to evolve. I mean, it wasn't necessarily overnight, but it was pretty quick. But then the first couple of weeks after they broke up, and he dropped that promo talking about Jack Perry's dead father.
Yeah.
It seemed to be, for Christian, I know who this character is.
Absolutely.
And it was just evolving the character from there. Jack Perry, his road to where he is now, a bit more circuitous. You know, there was a, hey, I want to win singles gold now that I'm not in this faction. He was in the Four Pillars match. MJF tried to convince him turn heel then. Didn't happen. He had the feud with Hook over the FTW title. Finally got singles gold in AEW, kind of had the heel turn there, but it's really all come together since the release of the All-In footage, the scapegoat character. And, you know, for someone who we were always concerned about the character aspect of the work, in-ring work is great.
Yeah.
But you got to find that character to separate yourself, like Christian did when they broke up. He found a character and it worked and it resonated and got over with the crowd. And he was doing amazing heel work. It just took a little bit longer for Jack Perry to, and you know, sometimes circumstances dictate where you go in terms of developing a character.
Well, you can even look back at, you know, the genesis of his heel character back in the run with Christian and Jurassic Express, the concerto that he hit on I think it was Matt Jackson. You can look at that and be like, oh, you know, that was that the seeds of that were planted back then, and what we have now, that's some pretty decent long-term booking. Now, whether or not it was planned out 2 years in advance, probably not. But to be able to capitalize on opportunities and get your character to a place where you understand who they are and you can be effective in what you're doing, that's the goal. And if you can, you know, use your time effectively and generate that history so that it makes sense. Now, when you look back, oh, maybe this looks like it could have been planned.
Exactly.
Even though we know that it wasn't.
Probably wasn't, no.
Yeah, probably wasn't. Anyways, let's go ahead and move on. Oh, yeah, here we go. Talking about number 8.
8.
The Mega Powers, brother.
All right, people might have an issue here. Mega Powers. It's a tag team, they'll say. It's Macho Man. It's Hulk Hogan. Hold on. Yes, Steve.
They never actually competed for Tag Gold, nor
That's
did they
correct.
ever win Tag Gold. And I maintain that makes them a faction, not a tag team.
Because Miss Elizabeth was just important, member of the faction as a quote-unquote manager as either of the wrestlers due to her role in the story of the Mega Powers.
Yeah, by my definition at this point, you don't need to be you could be a tag team matches, but not and have a name, but not be a tag team. They were a tag team. I get that, but the fact is, it's not like they were ever, competing in tag team gold.
No,
matches,
they were a tag team. They competed in tag team matches to advance the story of Macho Man, Hogan, and Miss Elizabeth.
Right, absolutely. That's a great way to put it.
And so, usually historically, if a group has 2 members tag team, 3 members, it's a faction. And people might say, well, it's a tag team plus a manager. Well, that kind of diminishes the role Miss Elizabeth had in this whole story.
Yeah, right.
Which is far greater than a manager, or historically speaking, the roles managers would fill in wrestling stories.
Listen, it's our list. We can call it a faction.
And you look back at the peak, the 80s peak of WWE, you could easily make the case this is the best story they did during that era.
Right, so it's fun to talk about it. Yeah.
It is fun to talk about it. When you have 2 competitors, Hogan and Savage, who were former rivals, and you have this instance where Macho Man is trying to beat Honky Tonk Man for the tag title, or sorry, not tag title, Intercontinental title. Macho Man's in a tough spot. Elizabeth goes backstage and brings Hogan out to help. And thus, Mega Powers were formed. And
was it ever explained, what was Hogan doing backstage when she ran up to him?
Well, if you listen to him, he's back there drinking milk and taking his vitamins.
Right, but he's a notorious liar.
That's correct.
Right, so instead of milk, it's probably just gobs of juice.
Yep.
Maybe orange juice.
Yeah, maybe not. Maybe different type. Nonetheless, it was.
He had his cheek out.
Yeah.
What's that, brother? Hold on a second. Okay.
It's a story that more or less took a good year and a half, 2 years to develop. Going to WrestleMania 4, Hogan was out of action. I believe he was shooting no holds barred around then. Mm-hmm. They had a tournament to crown the new WWF champion after the Hogan Andre thing on a Saturday Night Main Event with the twin ref and all that stuff, and DiBiase buying the belt off Andre, or Andre giving him the belt. And Macho Man won the title. He was champion.
Yeah.
Between Mania 4 and 5. And that's when the relationship started to fall apart.
Yeah. If there's one thing that Hogan really wants to be near, it's the championship.
That is actually correct. Yeah.
So he was
the closer the better. He wants it touching his waist.
So close to him. Yeah.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. To be in just proximity next to someone else who has it, not good enough.
Which is exactly why the Mega Powers exploded. Kind of. Look, we all know it's because Hogan wanted the title, but in kayfabe, it was because Macho Man felt that, and it's funny because I went back. I was doing a run of watching some SummerSlam main events, and sure enough, at the end of SummerSlam '89, when they took on, was it '89 or '88? '88. When it was the Mega Powers, because '89 they're already broken up.
Yeah, that's when it was. That was when it was Macho Man and Zeus versus Hogan and Beefcake, right? Yeah.
So I'm thinking of DiBiase and Andre the Giant versus the Mega Powers of SummerSlam. And I think that was the one where Miss Elizabeth took off the bottom part of her skirt, and she just had really big underwear on, or a swimsuit on underneath. Uh-huh. And they're like, "Oh wow, look at that!" So it's like the 20s on the beach, right? You're wearing you're showing too much leg. But when they're victorious, Hogan hoists up Miss Elizabeth onto Macho Man's shoulders, and you see a little tap on the booty there. I bet you Macho Man was watching that. Why is he getting touchy with my wife? Oh, yeah. But anyways, the idea was Macho Man was seeing things that weren't there. He was super jealous of Hogan. At one point, I think it was Saturday Night's Main Event or something like that, Hogan carried Miss Elizabeth to the back.
During a tag match, yeah.
During a tag match, Macho Man not happy about that, and then they had a WrestleMania.
Well, they had a huge fight backstage where they're Elizabeth getting tended to by the trainers. That's after Hogan takes her backstage. Macho Man's left alone in this tag match. He comes backstage, starts yelling at Hogan.
In that.
Well, there's that still where he's got his finger in Hogan's face. And so right then and there, mega powers explode. They face off the main event of WrestleMania 5, and it's interesting where you have, I don't know, a good 60% of the match is like a quality Macho Man match. It's like faster paced, but once Hogan starts his comeback, it's boring, formulaic Hogan match.
Yeah, right. Yeah, just slow down.
Plotting, hulking out, boot, leg drop.
Crowd loving every second of it, though. Boy, oh boy. Boy, they love Hulkamania. Yeah, man. And then the good guy, I guess, won that match.
So. That's the question. Was Hogan ever a hero?
You don't tease that, man, because we've already said that'd make a killer video.
It'll happen someday.
All right.
Could be 10 years from now. It'll happen someday.
Oh, wow. 10 years from now. Oh, God. It'll be our very last video.
Yeah.
How about that?
Yes. Perfect. There we go.
Anyways, Larson, before we keep going on, let's go ahead and pay some bills.
Let's do it. This episode of Going in Raw is sponsored by BetterHelp, Steve. I'm happy we're on the same page. And you agree with the old workout saying that you never skip leg day.
Oh, leg day. Okay.
Yeah, you just told me you started doing legs on a weekly basis, and that's a great idea. I think you should continue. In a similar fashion, you also shouldn't skip out on taking care of yourself and establishing your self-care non-negotiables. And while I make it a priority these days to get in at least one leg workout every week, I haven't always been as diligent about taking the time to prioritize what makes me happy.
And I think I can speak for both of us when I say that. We're pretty busy people. This podcast, our YouTube channels every week. Our schedules are packed with work stuff. Also, of course, we're family guys, so family stuff. School's coming up next week. When your schedule is so packed, it's easy to let those priorities slip.
That's right. But when you feel like you have so little time for yourself, it makes things like therapy all the more important. Back in my mid-20s, I've spoken about this before, I was dealing with severe anxiety, and therapy helped me get my life back on track and allowed me to learn the skills I needed to better cope with my anxiety and help me establish my self-care non-negotiables.
And if you're thinking about starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. BetterHelp is completely online and designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited for your schedule. All you got to do to get started is fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist, and then you can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge.
So never skip therapy day with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/raw today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/raw.
Yeah, man, might have pulled a Hogan and fibbed a little bit on that don't skip leg day. But anyways, let's go ahead and continue on, Larson, with number 7. The Elite. The Elite. Man, probably to this day, the greatest story ever told in AEW's history, and it's kind of continuing on to this day, is that of Hangman Adam Page, who many could consider the main character of AEW, if there is one. His quest for the title, of course, going through the tag team with him and Kenny Omega, and eventually all that coming to an end once once Hangman Adam Page finally beat Kenny Omega for that title, kind of ending the Elite sort of as we knew.
Yeah, I mean, at the time, Kenny was dealing with numerous injuries. And so he took a leave after dropping the title to Hangman. Hangman was doing his own things. He was already estranged from the Young Bucks. Cody had been doing his own thing for a long time by that point. Mm-hmm. So the Elite were more or less no more in terms of being active faction in AEW for a while. And again, you mentioned earlier a lot of the criticism that has been levied against AEW by us and others, and a lot of it fair. One thing they've gotten right since day one is how they've approached the booking of Hangman Adam Page, someone who was probably at that juncture at the beginning of AEW the least decorated member of the Elite, and how that just wore at him.
Yeah,
and the insecurities that arose within him because of that.
The expectations that were placed on him.
Yeah, I mean, instantly he comes out that opening press conference, says, "I'm going to be the first champion."
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know, and when in that match faces Jericho to crown the first AEW champion, comes up short.
Mm-hmm.
and it just gnaws at him. And so much of his story is him dealing with his own insecurities and how they gnaw at him.
And how that's wrapped up with being part of the Elite. It's kind of interesting that they started in late 2019. When did Hangman win that title? It was
2021,
probably.
It was November of 20.
Full year 2020 or 2021? I
think it's 2021.
Okay. Yeah, because it was 2022 that he lost it to Punk.
Yeah. And Kenny got it in 2020, so yeah.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
It is interesting the first 2 years of All Elite Wrestling, the Elite were basically telling the story of their breaking up. Kenny going on his belt collector thing. There was based kind of the super elite with, the Good Brothers were there. But that all sort of had to do with Hangman Adam Page. And like you said, Cody also, who kind of almost immediately you could tell his philosophy for pro wrestling was not in line with the others. And so the stuff that we, so much of the Elite, yes, was born of Ring of Honor and New Japan, but also their own being the Elite YouTube series. And I wonder if that's one thing that a lot of people expected was that kind of stuff on television. And they really didn't do a whole lot of that. That being said, to this day, there's a different version of the Elite. It's kind of like the Sid version of the Four Horsemen, maybe, but maybe not. But yeah, no, that moment when Hangman Adam Page, because after that, Kenny took a long break after that.
Yeah.
And when Matt Jackson basically nodded at Hangman Adam Page and he knew it was over, and he was like, "We're not going to stop you because this is inevitable. Hit your buckshot." And he does. He wins the title, and at that point, pretty much the Elite were done and over with.
Yeah, it was the summer of the following year that Kenny and the Young Bucks reunited for the Trios tournament.
Right, exactly. Yeah, and they brought in Adam Cole and all that. So they came back, but that original version of the Elite, in terms of that story beat, which kind of signaled the end of the original Elite, I thought was an incredibly effective one, and it tied into Hangman's story in just an absolutely beautiful way. I'll never forget when they lost the tag titles and he went to collapse in Kenny Omega's arms and he just let him go. It was such a great moment.
And that's again, where AEW, when they were hitting on all cylinders in that span 2020, 2021, parts of 2022, where so much of their best storytelling was stuff happening in the ring. And not just, in terms of putting together matches where the moves themselves tell the story. It's the interpersonal dynamics and those the way those were explored in the wrestling ring was just, some of it was so good. And a lot of it was the Elite stuff.
Yep, absolutely. All right, let's move on now to number 6. Break it down.
Let's talk about Degeneration X.
Oh, shit, I thought we were talking about the NWO. You're right, DX. It's DX.
It's a different theme.
Right. Different theme song. Yeah, Degeneration X. Again, there's been several iterations of DX. But you could talk about, obviously, when Shawn Michaels lost the title, Stone Cold Steve Austin, the original DX sort of went away, but we're not going to talk about that. My personal, I think in retrospect now, looking back, I think I appreciate original DX most.
Oh, yeah.
But at the time, Triple H, New Age Outlaws, X-Pac, and Chyna, that's when I started watching. And so they were the version of DX. Well, that version of DX carried Triple H to a certain point, but Triple H wanted a little bit more.
Oh, he wanted a lot more than babyface mid-card champion.
Right, exactly.
He wanted to be number one heel in all of wrestling. He wanted to be pretty much Ric Flair. He wanted that spot.
He did, yeah.
He wanted that spot.
We'll talk about Evolution later.
Yeah.
But yeah, he wanted to be that guy. And he made it happen. I mean, at that point, because it was WrestleMania 15, I think it was.
Yeah.
He turned, if I'm not mistaken, X-Pac and Shane McMahon were having a match.
For the European Championship, I believe. Yeah.
Right, exactly. And then, what was it, Triple H and Chyna?
So earlier, before
I just watched this the other day.
Mania 15, Chyna joined up with the corporation.
That's right.
And left Triple H. And then at Mania 15 earlier in the card, during Triple H's match against Kane, I believe.
Kane, yeah.
China helped him win, seemingly a reunion. DX is back together, only for Triple H to cost X-Pac his match against Shane.
I remember they did one backstage interview after she helped him against Kane, and they were like, yeah, no, it's great. It's back together. Everything's great. And then, like, the next match was X-Pac Shane.
Yeah. And after, once Triple H left DX, you had X-Pac and Kane start a tag team. Of course, New Age Outlaws, they were still doing their thing. But, Triple H at that point was the glue that was keeping DX together, and everybody kind of went their separate ways for a spell. They eventually had a reunion as heels when Triple H was champ, I believe.
Even that was really short-lived.
That was pretty short-lived, too.
Yeah.
But, the kind of more shocking turn where Triple H caused DX to basically implode at WrestleMania 15.
That's right. Absolutely. Let's move on to number 5. Wait, we already did DX. This is DX?
No, it's NWO.
This is NWO.
NWO,
right.
Steve. 444 live. So, NWO all started to fall apart after Hogan kind of lost. WCW World Title Sting at Starrcade 97.
Right.
But given that Hogan screwed up the finish, it's storytelling 101.
Yeah.
Hulkster.
Yeah.
Just take the pin.
Yeah, dude. Yeah.
Just take the pin. Anyways, so they vacated the title because of the controversy surrounding the finish of that match. And so at Super Brawl, early the following year in 1998, Hogan and Sting had another match to crown the champion. Macho Man, this match is such crap, too, because it's Hogan destroying Sting for like 18 minutes, only for Macho Man to cost Hogan the match. Sting wins. And so Macho Man reveals, Hogan, you dropped the ball. I'm going to win the title, and I'm going to be the one that brings it back to the NWO. Of course, Steve, what does Hogan love above all else?
The title.
Yes. So this upset him. And so there was a line in the sand drawn where you had Hogan and those loyal to him on one side. You had Macho Man and Kevin Nash on the other side. And tensions rose. And, I watched this bit from a tag match on Thunder where Hogan comes in and attacks Macho Man, and Nash starts shoving Hogan and whatnot. And of course, eventually it all leads to the split of the NWO and the creation of NWO Wolfpack.
Right, yeah. Yeah, which was awesome. I know I was laughing so hard the other day when you mentioned, was it the Pro Wrestling Bios video that was criticizing Wolfpack for being middle-aged men dressing up like gangsters? Hey, when I was 21 years old, that was awesome.
Their theme was great.
Their theme was amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. I do remember this, though. I do remember this about it. I remember when there was like a face-to-face promo between Hollywood and Wolfpack and Kevin Nash getting on the mic. And I got almost, even back then, I got almost uncomfortable with just how much Kevin Nash was shit-talking Hogan, saying that he looked like an old grandma with those sunglasses on, and Hogan looked like his feelings were genuinely hurt. He crossed the line, brother. It's like when Brock Lesnar said, "Party's over, Grandpa."
Yeah.
It had the same feel to it.
Yeah. Apparently at the time, Nash and Hogan were having some legitimate beef backstage.
Yeah. Nash is like one of the dudes I would least want to be on the mic against, because it's not like he was the best talker, but his shit was real, and he had that like air of like, I don't give a fuck, that it probably would just absolutely crush me.
Yeah.
you know? Oh, Kevin Nash doesn't think I'm cool. That sucks.
It'd just be one pointed line that would just utterly demoralize you.
I wouldn't be able to sleep.
You'd get cry face. Kevin Nash would give you cry face.
He kind of gave Hogan cry face. Good thing I was wearing those granny sunglasses.
Couldn't see it. Yeah, and of course the Wolfpack storyline, not exactly booked across the board the best, but
that was weird as hell.
Presentation was fantastic.
Yeah, the song was great. That's the only thing. The song, and you're wearing like red and black. That's awesome.
T-shirt was cool, and to see Sting in there finally joined the NWO.
Yeah.
In some fashion, that was neat. Him and Luger were back together. That was neat.
Luger seemed really happy. K-Dog, Conan, he was cool. Yeah, no.
It all fell apart when, the finger poke of doom and all got back together. It all fell apart at that point. Actually, you could kind of tell it was going to fall apart when Scott Hall was, for whatever reason, decide, I'm not going to join Wolfpack. I'm going to go with NWO Hollywood.
Boy, I hated that. That's the one thing back then I was like, why is Scott Hall not in the Wolfpack? It makes perfect sense.
He was the one that started saying Wolfpack on WCW TV. It was him, Nash, and Six.
Yeah.
Sean Waltman. They were the Wolfpack. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And you don't include him in it. Get out of here, Bischoff. Get out of here.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Yeah, I agree, man. But no, and then of course, obviously they do the finger poke. They're back. NWO 2000, Disco Inferno for some reason. Like it was all bad. But no, that the division between Wolfpack and Hollywood, that's when it really actually the original NWO was dead at that point. Mm-hmm. And I thought it was pretty damn cool.
Yep, there was a lot to like about it. Let's move on to number 4, Steve.
If you believe yours is the only way.
It's assuming that I think we've had some discussion about the possibility of the nature of Rhea Ripley's shoulder injury.
Oh, here we go. Let's go. Conspiracy theory.
Well, it's not. I'm taking it at face value that she was legitimately hurt. And if so, what a fantastic pivot in terms of seeing an opportunity here to add new layers to the characters of various members of the Judgment Day and have them lead to a fantastic split that in the process elevates Damian Priest a ton, Rhea Ripley, Liv Morgan, Dom Mysterio, Finn Balor. In this one story, the profile of JD's a tag champ, so I guess he's involved as well. Yeah. Even Carlito is doing the most interesting work, maybe of his whole career right now.
Because, even on Raw, there was some apprehension seen from him to, really lay in some shots.
Yeah, so one storyline that seemingly they had to adapt what they were doing after Rhea got hurt. And they pivoted in a way in a matter of less than 4 months. Elevated 7 wrestlers. It's something else. And to do it in a fashion that's interesting and dramatic and leaves you wondering. Like going to SummerSlam, we assumed that Dom was going to cost Rhea the match, but it wasn't a certainty.
Yeah.
There was a lot of other things that could have went down that could have still led to Liv retaining her title. Same with Damian.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It wasn't a certainty that Finn was going to cost him.
It could have been. If wrestlers get injured in storyline all the time, it would. But you can almost always know when one is real, one's fake.
Yeah,
it would not shock me at all, if her injury was strictly for storyline purposes. Would not surprise me if they said, listen, this is going to be a big deal. You have to get written off via injury, but we want this to seem like it's the real deal because it just helps the story, which is totally true. It could be that she was actually injured. And in which case, if Rhea was around while Liv was doing these things, that could have been really interesting to see how they pull that off. But from a storyline perspective, her absence leading to Liv being able to take advantage of her absence makes so much more sense. And it could very well be, it's not even conspiracy. It's simply, are they at a point where they're able to fake this stuff better? In the parlance, keep the kayfabe better, where people don't know if something's real or fake. I don't know. And it's just, hey, I'll be honest with you. If they start blurring the line between, hey, this person is injured, and this is for storyline, good on them. keep the goddamn kayfabe if you can. You know, we don't have to know every goddamn thing. If it helps the story, then do it. I like surprises. I think they're great.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know, but like you said, the dissolution of the most recent version of Judgment Day was pulled off absolutely beautifully, and you see how, and Triple H, I think, probably learned a lot with Evolution in how to create through long-term storylines the perfect opportunity and knowing when to pull the trigger on something like that to maximize the reception of the fan base and to get the biggest story beat possible, the most memorable story beat possible. And then you see the results of that the next night on Raw. Rhea and Damian have just an absolutely nuclear reaction.
Yeah.
And it is something special. So yeah, I thought that they did an absolutely magnificent job with that.
Yeah, and it's going to be interesting to see what twists and turns we get going forward, how long this whole, at least this phase of the story is planned for. Because it could easily go to WrestleMania, have Liv and Rhea compete at Mania for the title. Damian and Finn. Entirely possible.
Yeah, it's huge.
Entirely possible.
Let's move on to number 3.
3.
Evolution is a mystery. You know, I should just be doing the theme songs to all these groups along the way.
You should.
I should have been doing that the whole time, but I'll do it this time. Evolution is a mystery.
Well, we've been doing quite a few. Ever since DX, we've done virtually every one.
1 is 3.
Is that how it went?
Yeah, I think so. 1 is 3. 1 is 3.
1 is
yeah.
3 is 1 and 1 is 3.
1 plus 1 plus 1 is 3.
Oh, some math from Lemmy, huh?
You got that right. Anyways, yeah, of course, Batista, Flair, Triple H, and Orton recreating the Four Horsemen. Basically, Triple H has said literally, yes, I was trying to do the Horsemen in my own way. I'm kind of surprised given that, I mean, they own WCW. I know there's like a thing that Arn owned the Four Horsemen name, I think. But, and I guess Triple H maybe just wanted to do his own thing, or Vince wanted to do his own thing. But they could have totally just used, if they had clearance, they could have totally just used the Four Horsemen name for this.
Yeah, probably. I mean, I don't know for sure, but Arn was a longtime producer with WWE. It's entirely possible he was working backstage at that juncture.
Yeah.
And, you know, maybe conversations were had about potentially. But at the same time, you know, you could take inspiration, obviously, from factions of wrestling's past, but put your own spin. And part of it, I'm sure, too, is Triple H didn't just want to have this iteration of the Horsemen always be tied to the Horsemen's legacy as opposed to creating his own. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right.
Like, he doesn't want to be like, you know, a footnote on the Wikipedia write-up of the Horsemen where you can have the entire write-up be about evolution.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So as mentioned, yeah, this was Triple H, Flair, Orton, and Batista kind of doing their own spin on the Horseman formula. Riding around limousines, private jets, fancy suits, expensive cars.
Yeah. Spicy women.
But a lot of it was about elevating Orton and Batista to main eventers.
Yeah.
And the split of Evolution really centered on that. So it first kind of started when Randy Orton defeated Chris Benoit, SummerSlam, I want to say 2003, to win the World Heavyweight Championship. Much like Hogan in titles, at that time, Triple H, he wanted belts above everything else.
Oh, he was all
namely
about
that World
title.
Heavyweight Championship. Mm-hmm. And so he was not happy that Randy Orton had the title. He didn't. Evolution turned on Orton during his championship celebration on the episode of Raw following SummerSlam, and he was out. And Evolution continued on for another year almost. Mm-hmm. So leading up to the Rumble the following year, Triple H was really lobbying Batista, hey, if you win, by that time Triple H was champ again. He beat Orton, I think, twice.
He did, yeah.
He beat
Reign of Terror right there. That's
yeah,
what that was.
right in the thick of it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he was lobbying Batista, hey, if you win the Rumble, go after the SmackDown title. Don't come after this one. Face JBL at WrestleMania, not me.
Let me ask you something.
Sure.
Was Batista right to do what he did?
What was the top title in WWE at that point, Steve?
Well, hold on a second, though. Yes, it was the big gold belt. Batista could have made that Friday title the top title. Wasn't it Friday? Was Friday SmackDown or was Tuesday SmackDown?
I think it was Tuesday. Either Tuesday or Wednesday. I feel like it's been on every day of the week except for Monday.
Yeah, maybe not Wednesdays. But yeah, I don't know. You take that title off JBL, that's an easy piece of work.
Yeah.
And then you're running your own show, and you can make yours. That's kind of a bigger deal. Take the title and make it bigger than.
Or you knock down the top guy in the company, en route to claiming the top prize in the company.
It's the guy that made your career, though.
Onward and upward, said Dave. Apparently,
yeah. Boy.
It made for a hell of a moment though, because he wins the Rumble.
Yeah,
that was the year Vince blew out his quads too.
Mm-hmm.
It's down to him and Cena. Batista wins. And you got that great moment on Raw where he's got the contracts, one with the Raw logo on the clipboard, one with the SmackDown. First, he's holding the SmackDown, thumbs up. Triple H and Flair like, yay, thumbs up, and then Batista, thumbs down. Powerbomb through the table.
Well, the great
Evolution
thing
is no more.
The great thing is it mirrored how they got rid of Orton.
Yes.
Thumbs up, thumbs down.
Exactly.
Number 2, when you go back and watch the video, the celebration between Triple H and Flair is so juvenile.
Oh, yeah.
They start thumbsing up and hugging, and they're all excited and jazzed, and then Batista.
I know. Triple H literally doing this.
Yeah. yeah. He's like on Thunderdome.
Yeah.
Oh, what a great moment. No, man, I remember watching that meal. Oh, God. What a star made what a star made in Batista with that performance right there, with that. Like, there is something so special about watching, like literally watching the moment when somebody goes from a mid-carder to a main eventer. And they did that with one flick of the hand, one flick of the wrist.
Yep.
And Batista is a made main event guy.
Yep. And I don't know if that would have happened if he had faced JBL.
No. I'm just saying, like, from an kayfabe, in story perspective, like, come on, Dave, let's run this place, man.
Why let's run this place when Dave can run this place, Steve?
Because he's in the middle of the reign of terror, man. Did Triple H? I forget. I don't know how the lineage
Dave
went.
had the belt for a while.
I think he did. Yeah, I think you're right about that.
He did.
Yeah. Anyways, let's move on now to number 2. Sierra, Hotel, India, Echo, Ligma, D's. The Shield.
The Shield.
Darn it.
So it's kind of hard to imagine the Shield were only on the main roster, only really together for like a short amount of time. It was like a year.
It was like a year and a half.
Year and change, yeah.
It was not a long time.
And in that year and change, like Dean Ambrose had the U.S. title basically that whole time.
Mm-hmm. Barely defended it.
Yeah, Roman and Seth were tag champs.
Mm-hmm.
And they were perhaps the most despised group in the entire company at one point, probably the most popular.
Yeah.
All within a year and a half. It's pretty crazy. And they seemingly broke them up, arguably at their peak.
Mm-hmm.
So they were in the midst of a feud with a reunited Evolution. Beat them at Payback.
That's right, yeah.
2014, I believe. And the following night on Raw, that's when Batista quit. And Triple H is like, don't worry, I got a plan B. And so to close the show, you got the Shield in the ring. Triple H comes out, talks about the plan B. Whoop-ha! Rollins lays out Ambrose and Reigns with that steel chair. And so much of modern wrestling history has spun off from that moment. So much.
Yeah, absolutely.
And Rollins has talked about that recently, about how pivotal that moment was in the history of wrestling in the last 10 years.
It is. You got to give credit to Vince McMahon for understanding. You know, we don't like to do that a lot here on the show in light of recent events, but for understanding Reigns, Rollins, and Ambrose and just how high their ceiling was, because these guys all just had careers that were out of this world, and to package them together as a group. And I understand that Roman Reigns in the documentary thing said he was not into the Shield breaking up when they did. And I get that. But there is something about striking while you're at your hottest.
Mm-hmm.
And just like the Judgment Day, absolutely peaking in popularity, and that's when you pull the trigger on it.
Yep.
And this was absolutely, and the execution, how he hits Reigns first, and Ambrose hears it and doesn't want to turn around to know what he knows is true, to see what he knows is true, that the Shield is over with, that his brother has turned his back on him. And then, Seth will pause him as well. And then they're off to the races. All three of them were main event. There was that Money in the Bank where they're all three champions on the same night.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, like you said, probably the best story in the history of pro wrestling, the Bloodline, spun off from a Roman Reigns character, still, experiencing the trauma of that, still dealing with the trauma of that. And so yeah, just the absolute perfect breakup of a faction.
Yeah, fantastic stuff. Fantastic.
Let's move on now to number one.
Sing the Bloodline theme. Dun 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 dun.
Yeah.
Dun 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 dun.
Yeah, there you go.
There you go. Yeah, it's the Bloodline. We've said it going on almost 4 years at this point. It's been quite that long, but easily within the last 2 years that we're talking about probably the greatest story ever told in the history of pro wrestling. The formation and breakup of the original version of the Bloodline.
The only reason I ever say probably is because I'm not well versed in like how much is going on in Japan and across the world. Maybe there is a story dealing with Universo 2000 that is just
pure
absolutely
cinema.
Epic in length and proportion and drama.
It could be. Don't know.
But in the history of modern televised wrestling, I do not think there is anything comparable to the Bloodline story of the last 3 years.
No, and I mentioned the cinema and things that may not be movies but are highly dramatic are just being described as cinema these days. But it's clear that the Bloodline story took a lot of inspiration from movies and prestige TV, because the level of depth and dimension to the characters is stuff you don't usually see on wrestling television.
Yeah, right.
And tying Roman's motivations all the way back to that original betrayal at the hands of Seth Rollins and how he carried that trauma with him and felt like, well, if I have my family around me, at least I can trust them.
Mm-hmm.
And if I have to, and he feels completely justified manipulating them because he thinks at the end of the day, he's doing what's right. And there's just so much good stuff from the inception with Jay and I guess Jimmy too, and Roman. The highlight, without a doubt, is once Sammy joined the Bloodline, and his inclusion with the Bloodline just started the domino effect of it blowing up.
Every single moment of the Bloodline falling apart, the symmetry with which they told that story, the callbacks with which they used to tell these stories, Sami Zayn in the chair at the Royal Rumble, Jay and Jimmy leaving, and then them turning on each other. Dude, Jay quitting, and then, Cody bringing him to Raw. All up to WrestleMania 40. Every step of the way has been of their breakup has been absolutely pitch perfect. This was not one single perfect moment like the Shield had. This was a series every step of the way for like a year of watching the Bloodline fall apart. And then finally at WrestleMania 40, we see how it all adds up.
Mm-hmm.
Just absolutely brilliant stuff in the world of pro wrestling that we did not think. And without Triple H taking over, I don't know that any of that would have happened.
It's interesting because reportedly Roman was not supposed to have the title very long once he came back.
Yeah, I remember hearing that. Yeah,
and that his heel run was not supposed to be prolonged by any stretch of the imagination. This was seemingly an avenue by which he would be reintroduced. They try to fast track the whole thing. Well, here's a cool heel the fans will get behind and turn him face. And Vince was going to try to push Roman as a babyface again, and it's great that eventually they realized, no, there's a lot here we could do.
Yeah.
Like Roman and Jay were supposed to have one match.
Dude, there's so much. It's funny because there is so much we do not know that once somebody writes a book about the Bloodline,
I know.
that is going to be killer to know the ins and outs from all the way back when you talk about what you talked about, because I remember you and I both reading the same thing, that Roman's initial the Universal title run was not supposed to be very long. And I think if I remember correctly, I'm not even talking about it was supposed to last until that day one pay-per-view that Roman
was like
missed.
a couple months.
It was like supposed to be a couple months, and he was supposed to be a babyface. And to understand, like, if that ever happens, to understand like what the various twists and turns backstage were. Because you gotta think, dude, you gotta wonder at least how much of it was Heyman.
Mm-hmm. Or Roman too, because I mean, you go back to when he left in the lead up to WrestleMania 36. Yeah, that was the pandemic one. Yeah.
Pandemic one, yeah.
You know, and he was tired of his creative. That was part of it. And if he came back knowing that he had a certain amount of stroke backstage in terms of getting what he wanted in terms of his creative, he had Heyman.
Mm-hmm.
They were working together on this stuff.
Yeah.
And, you know, to their credit, if they saw there was a lot of potential for some interesting stories here, they pushed for it and made it happen.
It's one wild thing about Roman is whenever, for example, Cody is interviewed, Cody will always keep a certain amount in kayfabe. Like when he was asked, I think it was Helwani's show, when did you know Roman was winning at 39?
Mm-hmm.
And his answer was perfect. It was when the ref counted 3. You know, because what are you supposed to say to that?
Yeah.
Roman, but there's always a little bit of Cody. Number one, I think Cody's character is just Cody.
Yeah.
And I don't even know if it's Cody turned up to 11. I think it's just a Cody.
It just seems like Cody, yeah.
Right. Roman always whenever he's talking to any social media cameras backstage, whatever, in that documentary, that dude is like always in character.
Mm-hmm.
There's like maybe a couple snippets where he's talking to The Rock or Triple H or whatever backstage, fly on the wall snippets where you can kind of see, oh, maybe he's not quite in character. But otherwise, that dude is always in character.
Yeah.
And you can just tell that that's a big difference probably, you know?
Yeah.
Like we've always heard about what kind of leader he is in the locker room and how he's like the guy and how everybody loves Roman.
Yeah.
And so you got to think that, I mean, he just seems like an interesting guy who knows if we'll ever get his side of things.
Mm-hmm.
But man, if somebody writes a book and they even get it halfway right, it'll be an interesting one.
Oh, it'll be fascinating. Yeah. Fascinating.
Anyways, like we said at the start of the show, please let us know in the comments. And I'm talking about, even if you're listening to this in the audio realm, it really helps going in raw for you to leave a rating, review, or a comment. So be sure to fill up those comments, leave those ratings, leave those reviews. On YouTube as well, YouTube algorithm loves comments. So drop those comments, hit those like buttons, hit the subscribe button, and we'll be back next week with another count out where we talk about the worst faction splits.
Ooh.
Till then, we'll see you guys around.
Goodbye.